everyone, you're very welcome to the third week of the HEA ESD Spotlight Series. My name is Mark Kelly. I'm currently on secondment with the HEA as the National Policy Advisor on Education for Sustainability. Today, I'm delighted that we have UCC here to share some of their ESD practice, which will take about an hour as usual. So anybody that has any questions and they want to put them into the chat or the Q&A, I'll be keeping an eye on that in the background. Please try and keep your microphones on mute. We are recording the session and the sessions are available for everybody early next week. So the first two sessions from DCU and Ulster University are up there at the moment. And just to remind people that there is an open call for case studies and open educational resources on the website as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to David from UCC.
Here, so really welcome. So myself, I'm David Nyaluke. I am the Education for Sustainable Development Officer here in UCC. And together with me is Dr. Catherine O'Mahon, the Director of the Teaching and Learning Center here in UCC. And also then we have Dr. John Barimo, who is the manager of the All-Ireland Sustainable Development Solution Network. So together, we are going to share the work of ESD that has been happening here in UCC. So I will commence there with an overview in terms of our agenda. I will commence with an overview of ESD work here in UCC, sharing some of the timelines of the key moments that have shaped ESD here in UCC. And then Dr. Catherine O'Mahon will follow, sharing the practitioner perspectives. So she will share her own perspective, but also the perspective of the other practitioners here in UCC. And then we will have a discussion from Dr. John Barimo, who will share the work that he has been spearheading here in UCC on creating the SDG Toolkit, and also then how he has also promoted the toolkit here in UCC as one of the tool to enable lecturers and the students to engage with the ESD here in their learning and the teaching. So yeah, so then I will begin then with my part there, sharing the kind of timelines, but also then my role in terms of the ESD officer. I joined here in this role in last year in 2024, and so I am relatively new, but I have gone up to speed to catch up with the work that I have to support here in UCC. So in terms of the journey of sustainability here in UCC, we trace it back to the year 2007. And this is the time when a couple of students here in UCC mobilized and demanded that the university should be more engaged with the environmental issues. So they mobilized and they asked, if possible, even from the national level, there should be created engagement with green activities. So green campus, green flag, just like there is such programs in the secondary level. So that was the push there from here. And actually UCC has been lucky because one of the students who was a leader in this movement, Dr. Maria Kiran, went on to be the sustainability officer here in UCC, and she has been then promoting the work of sustainability here in UCC as one of the key persons here. And then if we go back, I think earlier already in UCC there was also the establishment of the Environmental Research Institute. So that was 2000. Then the students came with their idea in 2007. But then the other key milestones there, we see in 2010, UCC became the first university to get the the green flag from the Foundation for Environmental Education. So it was actually globally the first university to get this green flag. So really, spearheading this work ahead. Then another key milestone in 2013, we see the creation of the Green Forum here in UCC. So the Green Forum brings together, actually is chaired by the president of UCC, and there is a number of members from different schools here. The departments, we call them schools. So from different schools, but also then from different research centers, as well as from the estates, and also very, very important, the students. So the students from the very years of 2007, they have been an important voice and influence in terms of the leadership of ESD work here in UCC. So then if we go to 2018, UCC then got a Gold Star Award for its work in including sustainability in the curriculum. So again, this was an international recognition that UCC got in 2018. Then if we move forward, then there we see also in 2019 we also got an impact ranking here, with the UCC launching the Living Lab programs here in UCC, and then that's the time when John came along and began spearheading the work of developing the toolkit to promote sustainable development goals, inclusion in the teaching. And I think today John is here and he is going to elaborate more about that work and its impact in terms of including SDGs in the curriculum here in UCC. So I think there's a couple of other milestones, including the UCC launching its sustainability and the climate change plan. So really trying to make a kind of a whole university approach of ESD. Earlier on, there is a couple of other movements. For example, a big campaign here on making the university plastic free in terms of the cups and the cups that we use and the things that we use in the canteen and in the different cafes here in the university. So that was again a big campaign there. Today, UCC has saved about 2.5 million plastic cups since establishment of that campaign. So some of these have been spearheaded by students. Some of them, for example, the library staff in UCC, they also spearheaded some of the programs here. So the different enablers and the pressure factors are coming from different sides here in UCC in terms of promoting ESD. So yeah, so I think that is a kind of a nutshell. And then of course, I was also hired here in last year to also take over from John and support the work of ESD here in the university, working under Dr. Catherine O'Mahon as from the Teaching and Learning Center, but also then working with everybody in the university here to help everybody include SDGs, students and lecturers to engage with that in terms of their learning and the teaching, but also in terms of research as well. So if I move further, then in terms of my role, I have identified 3 pillars of ESD work here in UCC. So the first part is that, the first pillar is looking at ESD in the curriculum and the co-curriculum activities. And this also includes in research. So that is the work that, John here pioneered in terms of including SDGs and sustainability in the curriculum. And of course, then we are looking at co-curriculum activities and the research. And then the other pillar is students' activities. As I said, students here are key. They are key leaders and a key voice in the sustainability and the ESD activities. Even now, one of the things that the students are spearheading is the creation of a UCC a sustainable food policy here in the campus. That's the students' initiative that is coming in the pipeline. So students, they are always doing their work, but also we are here to also support their activities as well, because they are the one that we are targeting to make sure that they learn and they embed SDGs, SDG and ESD practices in their learning. And then the other pillar is the ESD supporting ecosystem. So really looking at all the activities that can support our ESD here, including the different things that are coming from our estates, from our research labs. So to try to bring all those elements so that they support the teaching and learning for our students, but also the research that is happening here in UCC. So I think I have tried to put that in a kind of a network, and so you can see the curriculum activities there, linking with students' initiatives, but also then in UCC also we have graduate attributes, so really preparing the students' competencies that they can move with these competencies to the workplace in their life. So we're trying to see how all those elements are linked together, and the ESD is included in all those elements. And so towards the end of my slide here, so one of the things that I also introduced here was the SDG game. So I trained last year to be a SDG game 2030 facilitator. It's a Japanese game, really good for immersion, for people to immerse themselves, play the game, and see the effect they can have by 2030 on the planet. And it helps really with the kind of system thinking and integrated problem solving, some of the key competences that we are all driving for in terms of ESD. So yeah, so that's what I wanted to share here in a nutshell, but also in terms of maybe later people might have questions there, so we can be able to clarify this more. So I'm ready now to hand this over to Dr. Catherine O'Mahon, our Teaching and Learning Center Director here, to share her I will stop sharing there. She has already put her slides, so to share her perspectives, etc. there. So Catherine, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you all, and I hope you're having a lovely Friday. I'm going to kind of take a practitioner's perspective, but I also, I suppose, I'm thinking about how to support ourselves and staff to find our way into this, and we'll share some approaches we've taken in UCC. But I think one thing just to really start with is this idea that while David has described this lovely journey, tomorrow also starts today. And I really think it's useful to think about the actions that we can take as a consequence of what we're learning here, or maybe ideas that bubble up. So I would invite you to, maybe jot down on a piece of paper, maybe you want to write it digitally, maybe you want to mute yourself and do a voice recording. But what one small step could you make where there's no barrier in terms of resources, where you have boundless energy, and maybe just something is sparked here that you're going, I'd like to try and explore that in my teaching and in my practice. So let's maybe take a note as we're going along and keep that. So the first thing I suppose I want to talk about is this idea that goal 4, quality education, and target 4.7 speak to the need to encourage education for sustainable development. And that's something that is anchoring, and it's something that's also a key lever for achieving the broader sustainable development goals. But the other targets under goal 4 are also of relevance and importance to the ESD goals, covering themes such as inclusion, gender equality, skills for decent work, and a global perspective. So ESD needs to keep an eye to all 10 targets under goal 4. And we'll see this in the kind of educational pipeline where we may be at different junctures along this, whether in early childhood or all the way through to lifelong learning. So when we think about or talk with staff about bringing in an ESD perspective into teaching, some staff resonate better when they think about the sustainable development goals and the underpinning targets. maybe they already map their disciplinary research or their disciplinary or their research to the SDGs, and this may be a more natural jumping off point. For other people, the competencies are actually something that they find more useful. And indeed, depending on your discipline, this is something John, David, and I were talking about. Some disciplines may more naturally map to competencies. So, for example, the normative competency may be more prevalent in like a sociology degree, whereas critical thinking arguably is present in many programs. Systems thinking, anticipatory competency maybe in the ecology space, and then even in the humanities or in psychology, self-awareness competency. So you can appreciate that certain disciplines may be more aligned with different competencies. Also, some programs that have a more professionally focused outcome or some accrediting bodies may also use the language of competencies more regularly. In the UCC example, certainly the SDGs has been the approach we've taken, but you're not wrong. It's about just making a choice or even combining both. So I think just as a point of reflection, maybe have a think about which one for you makes sense in terms of a jumping off point. And there's a couple of different competency frameworks out there as well. Just one thing to kind of be aware of is, I suppose, just a critique about the competencies in general, is that there's not necessarily consensus. As in lots of different areas, there's always different opinions and debates in this area, but there's not a full kind of consensus as to what those competencies should be. And the ones outlined previously, which mentioned critical thinking and other elements, arguably are things that could be designed in any good quality program. So critical thinking, normative competencies, etc. So Week et al. In I think 2018 or maybe a bit earlier tried to outline the ones that specifically speak to sustainability, and this I think has then been developed further into Green Comp and others. And this is just really, I suppose, suggesting that systems thinking, values thinking, future thinking, all of these very clearly support kind of sustainability. And what Week et al. Are trying to say here is at the top level that integrated problem solving is kind of drawing from all of those competencies. So it's kind of an overarching piece. And Dave, myself, and John were talking about this and thinking that that's actually a really good argument for working in an inter and transdisciplinary way, because you often have to connect up all these things. And the reality, I suppose, as well with the Sustainable Development Goals is that they're highly integrated, interlinked. So the point, I suppose, is wherever your starting point is, be it ESD competencies, the SDGs, these activities are interlinked. So when you're working on one, you may be connecting to multiple, and that's great. So that might actually make you feel like you're achieving more, maybe with your one step forward. So rather than seeing this as something to overwhelm you, consider that when you make the decision to bring education for sustainable development into teaching, you're probably touching on a lot of other things. And this is something we would say with our staff in UCC as well. So a key aim of education for sustainable development is to provide students with transformative learning experiences. And John is going to develop this thinking a little bit more in his session. But as a way to simplify this and make it not feel overwhelming, we've used the head, heart and hands model in UCC to really think about how can we not just focus on cognitive kind of knowledge-based development, but how do we unlock the heart and how do we actually activate the hands and become kind of practitioners and make steps towards positive social change. So some example of learning outcomes that can reflect this are the example from ecology, where you may be explaining basic ecology with reference to local and global ecosystems, that's the head. Arguing against destructive environmental practices, which is engaging the heart, and then connecting with local groups, working towards biodiversity conservation is where you're really practically doing something with an action focus. Other kind of core pedagogies that actually are models for education for sustainable development can be the use of case studies. So it could be aligned with global it could be sustainability related issues. It could be to do with environmental sustainability, economic or social, but as a way of thinking through and applying their kind of disciplinary knowledge. Problem solving, similarly, linked to the case studies. Project-based learning, they can often be attuned to core questions. Cooperative inquiry, particularly when you're bringing two disciplines together. and community-based learning, which I'll speak to a little bit more, where you're working and learning with a community partner on an SDG or ESD related topic. In UCC, as shown in the timeline, an important point for Education for Sustainable Development was also our connected curriculum, which is still the framework for thinking around how we design and enact teaching. And this is reflecting a lot of existing practices and strengths that we would have in the university, rather than trying to get everyone to do new things. But it built an existing strength, and it consists of 6 main elements. So not every program needs to connect at this deep level across all of those elements, but certainly every program is encouraged to include a number of these elements. And you can imagine that if someone is doing a work and bringing through research-based teaching, oftentimes it's responding to sustainability challenge. Maybe students are gaining key skills that will help them in terms of future employment, and it may also have an aspect of inter and transdisciplinarity. So depending on the activity, the approach taken here, you can touch on a number of elements at once. So how did we actually make this kind of resonate with people? And hopefully some of this may resonate with you in terms of thinking about your approach to ESD. So we wanted to show a path and not make people feel a little bit at sea. So we talked about the stepwise integration of ESD. So you can do something where it's just an introductory element, but you're very intentionally doing that. Maybe you might try and bring in an insight from sustainability from the perspective of the discipline. This is another further step in, and so on. And then I suppose the innermost column here reflects someone who's using ESD as a central design principle for their module or program. But they're also critically engaging with aspects of this. So it's that would be particular to discipline, maybe people's particular expertise, but we are encouraging people to see place their programs or courses somewhere along this. So just, I suppose, for yourselves, just take a brief moment, and where might you sit in the self-evaluation in terms of what you're trying to do with ESD? Maybe you're already in a very kind of integrated space. You've thought this through. You've written learning outcomes that reflect this work, or maybe you're at a more introductory phase in this, and you're just trying to find your footing and step into this area. All of this is worth doing. So in terms of that work started in 2018, and where are we now in terms of integration of ESD in the curriculum? So work that David did actually since joining us last year is he actually looked at where staff had mapped their programs to the connected curriculum. Every program offered in UCC is now mapped to the Sustainable Development Goals and mapped to our connected curriculum. So this first diagram here shows that these are the 63 undergraduate programs that we offer outward through the Leaving Certs and other students coming through. And of those 63, 75% are mapped to the Sustainable Development Goals, whereas the other 2 connected curriculum elements are at almost 90%. So, and of these programs mapped to sustainability, goals 3, you can see here the number 25, goal 4, which is quality education, and goal 5, which is gender equality, are the most frequently or commonly mapped to programs. So we've got a snapshot of where we are, and it gives us a sense, I suppose, particularly in relation to David's work, about where there's strengths, where there's additional work to do, and also we have curiosities about how people are doing this and how they're finding their pathway into integrating in ESD. But remember, for this work, staff completed a self-evaluation. So this may have led to under-reporting or over-reporting. But it still gives us a good conversation point and a kind of a baseline figure to work off. In terms of that practitioner space, how I'm doing this, so myself and my wonderful colleague Ruth Halley, we've been running for nearly 10 years a module with postgraduate students on community-based participatory research. Ultimately, its purpose is to upskill our postgrad students to be able to do this work as part of their doctorate, or also as kind of future researchers. We have a new community partner each year. It runs for 12 weeks, and we do 4 community sessions where we're kind of trying to work through and respond to the community's question. And then we do the classroom sessions where we're really, I suppose, trying to scaffold some of the students skills, knowledge, and co-design with our community partner the activities we'll run in the community setting. So what you see here is us using photo voice to try and think through the question that the community partner has posed. And what almost all of the questions that have come through will align with the broader kind of sustainability challenges. And this is us working with the NASC Women's Programme in Cork, which is a programme for migrant women. And then the assessment is we'd use a reflective journal, because we often find that this is a helpful place to kind of surface ideas, surface kind of any challenges, changing kind of, I suppose, feelings about things, but also that idea of head, heart, and hands. We're trying to scaffold kind of the knowledge, the frameworks, the interpretation, as well as the heart, which you absolutely are responding to the expressed challenges of a community organisation, and then the hands as they're gaining really key skills in terms about managing, facilitating similar type of work and conducting research in these spaces. So that's our kind of practitioner model here. And then just another one just to contrast, I think, is a really lovely example of out of the box thinking, which is our colleague in German who shared this model of using contrasting the economic models represented in German literature based in pre and post Cold War Berlin. So you might recognize here the this Donut model for representing the kind of circular economy, the idea of an ecological ceiling and social foundation, and that what we're trying to do is create conditions that we sit within both, so that that's a more sustainable world. But that donut kind of model has been utilized in interpreting and making sense of German literature to try and, I suppose, connect ESD with an area that perhaps surprisingly is ripe for discussion. And I suppose the other point is, as you saw on this slide, arts-based methods are often a really helpful way to kind of bring an inroad into some of these discussions. And also knowing that our students are often the very best teachers around ESD, because like all of you, I'm sure there's so many different things that come in that we suddenly have to bring into our curriculum. And it can feel a little bit of a shaky space where you're not always sure about, area. It might feel new to you. It might be an area that you've not explored before. So sometimes it's bringing in the students and saying, let's figure this out together is so valuable. And anyway, so I hope that gives you a little bit of food for thought, and I'll pass you on now to John.
Okay, so I want to give you like sort of more the behind the scenes tour of the SDG Toolkit and talk more about the rationale, and and especially if you're thinking about how to use something like this or develop something further. And it exceeded our wildest expectations. And I'll say, for starters, there were 3 grants from National Forum and HEA that enabled this work. So, and it was a journey, and this was my lockdown project. So this was, in a world where we were all trying to make sense of, this was something to focus on. But the exposure this has gotten, and even, it's showcased by United Nations Academic Impacts. It was showcased in the Irish Second SDG Implementation Plan. So it's received its share of recognition. But I think what I was most thrilled to see when I pulled some data, the analytics of the website about 6 months ago, over 20,000 views. Only about 40% of those coming from the Cork area, hotspots in Dublin and Waterford, in the UK, among other OECD countries, but 10% from the global south. And that, is directly affecting SDG 17.9 in a positive way, that target. But this is it's become an incredible impact. It's open sourced, it's web-based, and we do have the story coming out any day now, hopefully, in the World Sustainability Series. So it's in press. And another piece to this, if I can move this forward, is that I think we've really, at some point, and I don't know where it happened, but it really moved beyond being just a toolkit, and it's really become something of a hub for teaching and learning with the SDGs. And again, I'm trying to, there we go. Okay, so and even another further impact is through SDSN, and SDSN Greece wanted to create a national sort of SDG toolkit for Greece in patterning it after what we did. So they received Erasmus funding and have been developing something for not only Greece, but a university in Spain and an association across the Mediterranean. So this is something I'd actually like to bring in for an all-island resource to make a version 2.0 of this this resource. And we're trying to secure funding for that right now, but to really get input from across Ireland and have it be co-created and hopefully co-produced. So now I'd like to just kind of unpack the toolkit a little bit and give you some of the rationales. Again, this was co-created with staff and students early days of the pandemic, right at the beginning of lockdown. So this was people just adjusting to the virtual environment for meetings. We did a lot of one-on-one consultations just because it was sort of awkward for a lot of people. And we collected a lot of good information by having that one-on-one experience with people. Consultations reached out wider to the EAUC Irish chapter. We consulted with Cork City Council, the Cork Chamber, and a little bit later through a partners grant with the National Forum, with Antashka Green Flag Program, we reached out to people connected to the Green Flag program across 15 HEIs. And then the other point is, professional development is key here, to fully unpack and to realize what this SDG toolkit can be. So one of the things, again, sort of the rationale piece, was trying to move people beyond the two-dimensional panel of 17 icons where, you pick an emblem you like and use it as a badge, but to really get people to look deeply, to look at it from different perspectives of what are these SDGs. And that wedding cake model is good for this, because right off the bat, you realize this is about people, this is about society and their economy, and lesser extent about the environment, but the environment is the foundational piece here. And again, going beyond the 17 goals, but really getting to think in terms of the 169 targets, because these are the action items of the 2030 agenda. So they're really where you can see what I think people are seeing more direct connection to their curriculum. Again, trying to get people to look at the 2030 agenda. And when people read this, a lot of the sort of criticisms they have of the SDGs seem to fall away, because it really is, as Catherine was saying, it's integrated, it's indivisible, it's interlinked. They say this 7 times, and I always love this passage that we reiterate that that the goals and the targets are interconnected, and it's a sort of a universal thought process. So it's very holistic. And what the image on the right is trying to show us, and it's an interesting tool, is the direct cause and effect relationship between SDG targets. And here I picked out climate action 13, and that's what's in turquoise. And the shorter the line, the more direct the interaction is between those targets. But it's a great way to sort of visualize this thing. But again, to move beyond that sort of 17 icons, and to also begin to embrace the complexity of the SDGs and not to be afraid of it. Another thing people were asking for was just a language of sustainability. How do I present this? How do I talk about this? And what I would say, again, read the 2030 agenda, because it does provide a transdisciplinary language within the document. And it's very well written. It's not your average legalese kind of document. But the image there is a word cloud of the 2030 agenda, where the larger font size is the word count. So just, you can see those terms jumping off the page there of where the focus is. What I'd like to say now is that as far as how we kind of envisioned and framed this this toolkit and the trainings was on the transformative sustainability learning, which I think Catherine mentioned for a second, but the part that most people identify with this is the head, heart, and hands. And it really is a beautiful image that it creates. But the idea of trying to create holistic learners and give them those opportunities to find that sweet spot of balance between these three. And, the authors, shout out the Bloom's taxonomy is where they based this, but they simplified it. But they also point out that the cognitive domain is really where higher education is focused, and really trying to push those ideas of synthesis and evaluation of knowledge. And with the psychomotor, or sort of that action or the skills being not always, but it is present in sort of design studios or science labs, or there are occasions, but it's not universal across a curricula. And the one that most people seem allergic to really is this idea of values and the affective domain, and that's the heart. But this is where motivation can come from, but the fear and the concern all along has been not indoctrinating people, but to allow people to space and chance to develop their own set of values beyond money. And the one thing to point out too is I've seen a lot of people try and claim the head, heart, and hands as their thing. And it's important to point out where this idea first sort of, that I can find is the first documented case, is Johann Pestalozzi, who is considered the parent of modern education. And he was thinking in terms of a holistic child-centered learning back in the 1800s. And when you think of the world then, it was this was following the previous century of René Descartes, the French philosopher, who was famous for that reductionism idea, sort of bringing things down to component pieces, and then focusing on that component piece. And I'll say that although reductionism did bring about great discoveries, but we've really moved beyond that, and I think it's become maladaptive now. And I think reductionism is actually one of the root causes of the polycrisis itself, because we really need to be thinking in terms of more universal and more integrative, the way the 2030 agenda is suggesting. And some of the reviews that have been done on TSL framework is and our Bolus and Bart was probably the most recent that I am aware of, but they really see is sort of overarching is that sort of critical thinking and the normative thinking, and that this is where we really look at not only our own unsustainable practices, but those of our community and our society as a whole. So this is sort of a very critical lens, and sort of building on what Catherine was saying is that, in terms of a competencies approach, that different disciplines really focus on different competencies, and to connect with those existing competencies and then sort of branch out. But the critical thinking, sort of that critical and normative competencies, I think are the most important myself, because that's where that evaluation of practice can really happen in a critical way. And another piece of TSL that people kind of forget when they gravitate toward head, heart, and hands, it's based on the transformative learning model of Jack Mezirow. And he has a 5-step process with a disorienting dilemma, which really is any young person looking into the future and thinking about their life in terms of climate instability, but then coming to a point of action at the end. And this is really the most important thing that we want for our graduates, is to really be taking action on this in the world. And I just warn people about overusing the word transformative, because it has become a buzzword, but it's not staying true necessarily to this origin. Back to the toolkit now, is that this was meant to leave nobody behind, and it was meant to have just an initial on-ramp for anybody to come into this. And so it's not only pan-disciplinary, that it's applicable to any discipline, but really any skill level. So this is a place where you can learn about just where sustainable development came from in the 72 Stockholm Conference of the UN, to where it was codified in the Brundtland by the Brundtland Commission, and moving on through the Rio conferences and all these things. So it really gives the origin, but it also gives the backstory and the history, but also what are these ideas and basic concepts are all in this section, and it's all nicely referenced. So if anybody wants a place to start, this will get you started and inroads into the literature. As far as getting into the sort of the real meat of this is kind of an area to guide anybody, and to really look at just basic teaching and learning for sort of pedagogy and redevelopment and of curriculum, is just really good practice, like constructive alignment of your assignments, your assessments, and your learning outcomes, or even helping shape learning outcomes to include the head, heart, and hands, or Diane Laurillard's 6 learning types. This is all in here as far as a way to guide you along in bringing sustainability in, but in a sound way. One thing I figured real early on in this development was that many of our staff were addressing targets of the SDGs, but they didn't know it. and they weren't surfacing it. So it was developing a mapping tool to help them have this realization, but to also visualize it at the same time. And it was simple enough to come across, but I think it's almost become one of the more powerful things of this whole toolkit, was just this mapping aspect. And it started out with map your module and then map your course, because I think that's actually more important myself, of how sustainability is discussed from that introductory module all the way through to the end. And but there's a colleague here in biology, Jerry Reen, and we kind of created something for the students to take, and you can see where your students' perspective is on their discipline or their module or their course of studies relative to the SDGs. But you're also getting them to explore the SDGs at the same time. And something that's important here at UCC, with the research focus, is trying to promote research-based teaching and inquiry-based learning. So this was another tool just to help staff to realize this and realize what they could bring into the curriculum of their research, but also giving them the co-benefit of having a way to put this into their grant proposals for just increasing their impact. So a co-benefit there. But again, this mapping turned out to be just something very simple and elegant, but it did gain a lot of traction. Catherine showed us this earlier. This is based on the connected curriculum, but it's trying to give them a 5-point Likert scale of where they sort of fit on the spectrum of integration of sustainability into their curriculum. And what we put is the top, and it's been modified a little bit from that, what Catherine showed, but to also include action-oriented pedagogies used within the classroom. And this is done for each of the SDGs, and again, looking down to the target level. And the important thing here is you don't get a 5 unless you've met the commitments of 1 through 4. So you can't just skip ahead there. And again, this is open source, right? It's just the only thing we ask is no commercial gain and to cite it, the source. But you can modify this however you want based on your own institution's needs or strategic objectives. Once you get into this, the idea was to guide people through to think beyond more than one SDG, but to also, if they have questions, give them resources so they can click on each of these SDGs. There's hypertext, which should take them to an EcoSoc website, which really is a nice inroad, very simple infographics, but then developing depth really quickly in targets and indicators and other resources to explore an SDG. So they can do this one at a time and work their way around and have their own little training on the SDGs as they go. An output, somebody just starting on the journey, they may connect to gender equality, but very in a superficial way they didn't realize. So now they've got a starting place. Myself, I used to teach a marine biology module, and had the action based and working with coral bleaching in the Caribbean, which was an interesting one. But again, I could see the interconnection and related it around other SDGs. And then once you get through that map is really some scaffolding questions, and I'm not going to unpack this here, and this is nowhere near an exhaustive list, but it's just really to prod a little bit to get people to think of how they can reach a little further to embed sustainability into their curriculum. Okay, so the one of the things that came out also out of those consultations with staff and students alike was wanting some kind of a resource library. Staff, again, just so many demands and so little time, right? So trying to make this as easy and to be truly a catalyst for them. And but also the students wanted some kind of resource that they could trust for doing their own inquiry in students and assignments. So trying to fulfill both needs and trying to provide resources. So it was sort of a curated and annotated list of resources. Some of the things they were wanting were videos. And again, remember, this is the beginning of the shift to virtual during the pandemic. So this is something they could bring right into, their learning management system as they were trying to figure that out. But still, online and hybrid persists. So it's a place where, again, it still has relevance. But as far as somebody who's more deeply engaged with sustainability, there's databases here, there's case studies, there's other tools that students can use in their inquiry to build assignments around to explore sustainability. So this is all within here, and this is something that could be expanded and with a better search feature. And finally, I'd just like to wrap up here with just looking at professional development. And it started with 1.5 hour workshops, and this was before the toolkit went live online. But and we just kept building more because there's more and more of an appetite, and it turned into 6 hour design sprints and eventually a 24 hour digital badge. But each of these, there were four points in common through each of those professional developments, and that's kind of that introductory piece, coming to terms with the complexity of the SDGs and why we really need to reach out beyond our disciplines, as Catherine was suggesting earlier. Just challenging those assumptions again, that transformative piece that Mesereau talks about, mapping to the targets and then finding ways to embed into your curriculum. And what I'd say the secret sauce of this is really coaching for confidence, helping the staff who are used to being, maybe the world's authority in a certain niche of their discipline, but how do we help them to have that confidence to share power with their students in the classroom and realize that they may not know as much as their students about some aspects of sustainability? So how do we help them to have security, to have a journey of co-discovery with their students in sustainability, and to invoke the curiosity of their students and keep it alive. And what I like really about this, this image on the right is about the digital badge, and that it's a circuitous journey. So I know David touched upon the journey, Catherine touched upon the journey, but it's not a straight line, and we really need to get out of linear thinking, because then again, with sort of that reductionism thing, that linear thought, that it's a progress, but we're dealing with multifactorial problems around sustainability, and linear thinking I don't think is going to necessarily bring the solutions we need quickly enough. But as far as somebody's own journey, right, that there's disciplinary issues, there's institutional issues of what are the aims and priorities and strategic goals of their institution. What type of university is it? These are all things that are going to affect this journey. So there really is no cookie cutter approach to this. And there's academic freedom. There's where are my own research interests and how do I bring these in? So again, this is a journey, of discovery. And it's really in the course of the journey to have a destination in mind, but to really live that journey as you go through. So don't be afraid if you're just at that starting point, that, to realize that it's just making that initial start and then gaining the confidence. And this story was also just accepted for publication on Monday with minor revisions, but that'll also be in the World Sustainability book series, hopefully coming out soon. And finally, I'd like to turn this over to Catherine for the closing comments here.
So I suppose just to return to that idea of collaboration and building together and working together, the initial prompt here was for you to think about, as that sole flower in the field, what small step could you make? And what I'd like you to either jot down for yourselves, maybe write digitally or even record, is what small step will you make? I don't think the chat function is working, but you could put it in the question and answer section if you even want to go one step further and make a kind of a collective agreement about one small step that you will make towards ESD integration. So yeah, that's just an encouragement for me. And I think if you just click on one more, John, because I can't move them. Thank you for your attention. So do consider putting up something just to kind of make that commitment. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks, David, and thanks, John. So really interesting. I wonder, like, I have loads of questions, but I don't want to be selfish and be hogging the limelight. So if there isn't many questions, I know the chat isn't accessible by most people, but if anybody wants just to unmute their mic and pose a question, that's okay too. And I will give you a couple of seconds to think about that. But I suppose just to summarize, what's really interesting there, what John finished on, and it's sort of known in the literature as the squiggle, that things don't go in straight lines. So often you'll see stories of sustainability across universities and business. And as John said, it's presented in a linear fashion. We did this, this happened, then this happened, and this happened. That's not the way it works. And if you look at the 23 years that David outlined at the beginning, like obviously you see lots of bits and pieces there that would lend to the, in inverted commas, success of UCC. But I presume we could put in lots of things that were challenges as well along the way. and stopgaps and barriers and so on. So does anybody have any questions that they want to pose to the team while we have them? We still have another 9 minutes.
I'll just jump in with a challenge while people are thinking. It was definitely, I suppose, budgets for staffing to keep this initiative going. You need someone like David. You need someone that can kind of give it a focused attention. You can get far with a coalition, but you can get further by having a really dedicated staff that can step into those roles and support staff. But we don't all have deep pockets, so
no. And there's lots of comments coming in about it being a great session and so on. Like, I have a couple of questions maybe to pose. Like, one is the importance of the bottom up, and I don't like using the term bottom up because it sort of implies a hierarchy, and should be no real hierarchy. But I suppose the student engagement coupled with the university commitment from a strategic point of view, and having both of those working in tandem. If any one of the three wants to make a comment on that. John,
I'd like to run with that one. Yeah, because having it in our strategy, and even in the second strategic plan has been front and center and really cutting across all priorities, that helps us meet strategic goals of the university, that helps enable us going for funding and all of these things. So it gives us the cover, that we need. But sort of maybe we'll call it the grassroots or from the classroom, that this is important too, and from the students as well, as like David pointed out. But something I wanted to say, but I felt like I was running out of time, was that some of the individual things that happened, and one that stands out to me during the design sprints was, and I don't want to say the discipline or anything, but it was a person that really seemed to be troubled with the power sharing that was having students there. She was with 4 of her students, and they were to start the co-creative process on redesigning a curriculum. And I could see that it was very stiff and awkward as I was passing through the different areas, different rooms. But she eventually did come to terms with it, and they actually got along famously by the time it was over. But I could see that there's an adjustment there to be working either in a classroom in the learning space or with the development of curriculum with students, that there is that I'm the professor knows best, that we do need to really see what the students need and hear from them.
Thanks, John. Katrin, do you want to jump in?
I think also it's like some students might be strongly motivated by environmental factors. Our own students' union did a really wonderful but hard to read a study on the cost of living crisis and impact on students. So I think some of it is just, I suppose, connecting with the issues that our current students are kind of energized about, worried about, housing, etc., and bringing that forward. So seeing the ESD piece as a way of creating institutional action. So it's through the curriculum, but also the co-curricular or kind of institutional function piece. That's a lot of the work that Maria Karan and our Green Campus Forum would work on, is how we're doing it in procurement, how we're doing it in terms of the digital space, like even the websites, trying to, some of our webmasters been looking at kind of carbon, low energy usage in terms of website design. So trying to bring it into many different spaces, but connect it to pertinent issues. So it's not always a solution, but it keeps, I suppose, it helps finding the lens into it that students are more concerned about.
Yeah, that's great. Paul, have you a question? You can unmute your mic there.
I unmuted it there.
Yeah.
It was just a comment, rather. I just found the session kind of fantastically useful because I'm here in Dundalk Institute of Technology, and we're at the early stages of programmatic review in the School of Informatics and Creative Arts. So the whole area of sustainability and education for sustainable development is relatively new, kind of at the early stages here. We do have a climate action roadmap and a sustainability policy just within the last year in the Institute. But I really look forward to exploring the SDG Toolkit as we kind of go forward into kind of designing programs and considering learning outcomes and writing up modules. So and it seems to be fantastically comprehensive. There's so many tools available, so I'm really grateful for it. So thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Paul. And I suppose, like, that's great to hear, because we think personally, and I think others would agree, the program review cycles are huge opportunities that if you don't have sustainability embedded, that's the quality assurance process within every institution that would allow that space. And, following on from sort of Catherine's sort of nudges and things there, open it up gently at first, and as an invitation, because the narrative around it is really important as well. But that's great to hear. So thanks a million, Paul. Just one final thing I might pose, because I don't see any other hands up, is going back to the students, because ultimately it's all about the students at the end of the day, as John alluded to there. The fact that, initially it was driven by students, that students seem to continuously have the opportunity to influence, like David mentioned, the food policy. This is really what we should be aiming for in higher education, because there's this perception that, when the student graduates, suddenly they'll be able to deal with all the complexity in the poly crisis. But if they're not given an opportunity to do these things and to fail in some cases, within university, how do we expect people to deal with all the chaos that's going on in the world? So I wonder, does anyone have a comment to that? The challenge around that is obviously time and space and so on. But
okay, well, I'll just start by saying that the rate of change is increasing so much. You've seen the hockey stick curve, right? When we're in such a phase of exponential growth and change in society, that students really need to be learning processes and be getting the tools to understand and to think big and beyond just information, because information now is so accessible. It's almost how to filter information. And I think that's one way to greatly empower our students is to giving them, sort of the abilities. And this is where competencies are also important, to be able to really to go out there and change, because I can't even imagine what they're going to face in their lifetime compared to sort of the acceleration of change I saw in my lifetime.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Just in follow up, John, you always spark some ideas. I think the other piece that's twin to that, John, like you were saying, is the trying to stop kind of eco-anxiety and almost the overwhelm that can also happen here, where we can't affect global politics. We can only make the small steps ourselves. But I think really seeing the value of those small things and that the optimism of the action can be the antidote to that kind of eco-anxiety. There's some really lovely research our own applied psychology are doing in terms about how nature-based solutions can also be part and parcel of being an antidote to eco-anxiety. We have a green shoots coordinator who's using a community garden as a kind of a vehicle for well-being, but also for learning. So there's so much creativity in spaces that can be a way to support skills development of students, but also to mind them in this as well. And I think letting them have more spaces for leadership, Marcus, which what you're alluding to as well.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So Dorcas was wondering about the SDG game. I don't know what the website name is, but if you want to email either myself or David directly, or I'll put it in the chat afterwards, because I'm sharing at the moment, I just don't have access. We'll put that up there. But it is a game that originated in Japan, and they're having trainings across Europe now. Just referring to the SDGs game, David. So I'll put that in the chat after. So I'm conscious of time. We're just on 2 o'clock. Again, very much thanking UCC there with David, Catherine and John doing fantastic work. So keep up the work. And Maria, who was mentioned a couple of times as well, just to note Maria's contribution, which has been huge over the last number of years. And just again to highlight the open call for case studies. There's a template format up there. We're going to be encouraging people to do that. Next week, we have the University of Galway, so we're really looking forward to that, a diverse range of examples of ESD practice. So hopefully you can all join us next week. So have a great weekend, everyone, and thanks very much for joining. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone.